Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm ZS Caraval from ZK Research, and I'm here today with ZKast regular Bob Laliberte, now at Cube Research. Bob, how you been?
Doing very well, thank you, Zias. How are you?
Good, good. So we're going to talk Cisco Live. We were both there, and boy, there was a lot there, huh?
It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, this might have been the most news-filled. You and I have been told, combined, just dozens of Cisco Lives, and I don't remember one where there was this much news coming out of it. Now of course there's a lot of things moving on in the industry, so I guess that makes sense. But boy, that was a busy show. They really packed the things in, and so let's approach this a little differently than we have in the past, Bob. Let's take a handful of the topics and try and do quick hitters on those. Maybe 4 or 5 minutes on them. The big news at every show, obviously Computex was at the same time as this event, is AI, right? And one of the things I've been critical of Cisco in the past is they hadn't really talked their AI story. We saw AI for networking, AI for security, for collab, but they hadn't really laid out what the Cisco AI story was. And I think they did a pretty good job at this show. And so the way I interpreted it was, in fact, we had a session that was outside the conference in a way, in the analyst session with Mark Patterson, who's in charge of their AI strategy, where he put together a chart that showed us all the different areas that Cisco plays in, how they're going to partner. But I think what they finally have now is a kind of overall end-to-end Cisco story, not how, on helping them enable their customers to move into AI, but a lot of that has to do with just a lot of next-gen infrastructure. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think like you. I think a lot of people have been trying to figure out what is their overall AI strategy. So to see them put together that slide with the building blocks of here's what we're going to do, this is what is going to make up our AI strategy, and here's, like you said, here's where we're going to do it ourselves. Here's where we're going to partner and have that ecosystem approach. I think the next iteration of that slide needs to show the ecosystem partners and not just generically here's where the partners are. But I thought it's a really good first approach to let people understand here's the tack that we're taking to AI, and I think from Cisco's perspective, right, they're trying to be the adults in the room about AI as well. So while they may not be pushing the forefront of AI, they're taking a very responsible, ethical, and I think measured approach to making sure they get their AI right.
Yeah, and I think there's a question as to whether Cisco's late with their AI story at all, and I think they are, but I think there's a reason why. Like Splunk is a big part of their AI story, and so they really couldn't talk a lot about it until the deal closed. But I also think that for them, coming out with an end-to-end AI story is much more difficult than it is for most vendors, given the breadth of their portfolio. And so, they have servers, they got, hyperconverged infrastructure, networking, they got, telco infrastructure. And so, if I have one product line, it's easier to have an AI story. If you're Cisco, it's much more difficult. And thinking about that end to end isn't an easy thing to do. And so I thought they finally put that together. And I thought what we saw was a 1.0 version of it, with more to come. The other part of, in fact, one of the interesting questions that was asked in the analyst Q&A was how they would describe Cisco's competitive advantage in AI. And to me, I think it's data. And if data is the fuel for the AI engine, then when you combine Splunk data with AppD and Meraki and Catalyst, DNAC and all the other things that they have, it's arguable that Cisco's got more data than anybody. Except maybe the hyperscalers, but certainly from an infrastructure vendor, that's true. And what do you think of that? Is there, when you think about their competitive advantage, is data going to be their long-term advantage?
No, absolutely. I think, like I said, for them, data is foundational to AI, right? And we all know that it's got to be trusted, it's got to be timely, relevant, all those good things. And so if you're trying to build out AI for your infrastructure environment, and when you look across what Cisco's able to bring to the table, integrating security with Splunk, integrating networking with Splunk, right? The ability to integrate the collaboration tools with Splunk. They're arguably going to have a treasure trove of data for organizations to be able to use to create, train, and fine-tune models moving forward. So I think they've got a great foundation. Like you said, the 1.0 is there, and now it's really about, I think, executing against that and putting those pieces together. For both, like I said, we talk about AI, and there's that AI for infrastructure and infrastructure for AI. And so they tried to lay out both of those, right? The data is foundational for building out the AI for infrastructure. And then they also laid out, I think, a lot of the infrastructure that they want to use to support those back-end GPU environments as well.
All right, so we give them a checkbox on AI, but more to come.
Yeah, I think more definitely we need to see the more to come. Yeah.
Now you mentioned Splunk, and so let's transition to the Splunk topic. If there's one other thing that I think investors have been looking at in particular, but certainly a lot of customers, is what do they do with Splunk? And I guess the critic of Cisco would say that, well, they just spent $28 billion to buy $4 billion in revenue. And actually, given Splunk's margins, that's actually not a bad deal if all they do is they pull them in and recoup the revenue. But there's got to be a greater emphasis on that, right? And I think on Splunk. And one of the things that I took away from the show was that Splunk actually, I think, has the opportunity to impact all of Cisco's business units. And they've talked a lot about it in the context of observability because that's obvious. And in fact, I'm impressed that they actually were willing to deprecate Cisco observability platform that quickly, move it over to Splunk, with Gary Steele in charge of all global field operations, roll app D into Splunk, which to me means Splunk is their go forward engine for observability. They've talked about Splunk and security, which I guess is also obvious. I would have liked to have seen more with Splunk and networking. Jonathan Davidson said that's coming. What were your takeaways on Cisco plus Splunk equals what to Bob Laliberte?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Like I said, I think a lot of it is foundational for their AI piece. So having that ability to manage data, take in, consume data, correlate it, et cetera, get it to where it needs to go is really important for organizations. I thought it was great that, initially when it happened, and we have to keep in mind, it closed pretty darn quick. I don't think anyone was expecting it to close that fast. Yeah. So there could have been, I think what we've seen is from the time it closed till now, a lot more announcements that help it make more sense. When they first came out and said, yeah, we're going to integrate security in Splunk, we all went, okay, that's great, but what else? Like, you can't be stopping there, right? And so this, I think, opened up. And like I said, while there's still work to be done, like you said, AppD and FSO integrated in day one virtually, or very close to it. That's great, right? You don't want to have any dynamic tension. You don't want to have people competing. Put it all together, have it unified, focused on delivering value from the customer as early as possible. So I think they've learned from prior acquisitions where maybe they've kept them separate and competed internally and trying to figure out where things go. So I think driving that together is going to help accelerate the value and getting that, more tightly integrated more quickly. I think, like we mentioned earlier, just having it also come out that, yes, we are going to integrate networking into Splunk. It starts building that, more comprehensive story, driving collaboration in through Splunk as well. I think those are all things where they can really leverage that base and be able to deliver, additional value for their customers through those tight integrations.
Yeah, I think that's a true statement. And one could argue the order in which they did it. When we asked John Davidson in the Q&A about like why we haven't seen more, he did correct me and he said he alluded to it on stage. He basically said that, look, there was a priority list and the company went through the different areas of the businesses. Now, I think that given the size of Cisco's security business, creating a Splunk plus networking story, the networking business, creating a Splunk plus networking story would have had kind of broader market impact than maybe Splunk was observability. But that's probably a longer story to pull together than the quick hits that they got with security and observability. So I'm not sure if I would have done it differently if I were them, but at least it's out there now that they have a story. Yeah,
the fact that they've got a roadmap for the integrations are there, and I think a lot of that is, we've seen for the last 5 or 6 years, prior to generative AI taking off, the whole world was about security, right? Everything was about security, these distributed environments. So I think they were thinking from a real-time perspective, hey, we've got all these highly distributed environments, larger attack surfaces, much more sophisticated attacks and threats happening. So how can we help those security teams that are overwhelmed with the deluge of attacks that are happening on a daily basis? Let's see how we can put that together first. I think what would have been helpful is if they came out on day one and said, our order of integration is going to be 1, security, 2,
Yes.
AppD FSO, 3, networking, right? And just, 4, collaboration, whatever that is right from the get-go. But they're getting there. Like I said, I've never integrated a $28 billion acquisition before, so I'm not going to speak to the complexities that go on behind the scenes and what they have to go through. And we'll trust the professionals that they know what they're doing. And like I said, now they've laid it out there a little bit more in concrete, and now it's going to be up to them to execute against that and show us the value of those integrated solutions, right? And prove to the market why that Splunk acquisition made sense.
Yeah, but I do think there is the potential here to truly be a 1 + 1 = 5 or something like that. One of the breakout sessions we had, I was talking with the CX organization, and they were saying they're a huge consumer of Splunk data. But again, that's part of the story that hasn't been told yet publicly. And I suppose I think the best point you made there was that they could have laid out the roadmap, made it a little clearer, and that would have helped. So now, one area that I guess I'm looking at the clock. Let's transition here. That where they have outlined a lot of what they're doing to Splunk is security, and I am actually blown away by the amount of innovation they've had in security since Tom Gillis arrived. They've completely rebuilt that group. They built the security cloud. They came up with XDR, their HyperShield product. I thought one of the things that was missing prior to HyperShield was it looked like the security group was heading down a totally, completely evolutionary path to the networking team, even though Cisco is a big networking company. But their whole tagline now is melt network security into the network, which is what HyperShield is. And what did you think of that product and what they're doing there?
I really like the HyperShield product, and the reason behind that is I've also been a big fan of the DPUs that have been created and the ability to distribute the services closer to the applications, specifically in the data center, right? So we all knew, everyone, when they think about security, they think about doing the moat and building it outside of the data center. And then they all went to, well, we've got applications have been distributed, so we have to move security to the cloud and get it up there. And so I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is a real movement to drive those security and enforce those security policies much more closely to the applications. And in this case, with modern applications and microservices, that means getting it on and understanding the east-west traffic and getting down to, as they're doing, down to the kernel level. I think that is only goodness for organizations that are building out these modern application environments. And my favorite saying is, cloud native doesn't mean public cloud only. So the ability to have that when you're building out those cloud native applications in your on-premises data centers and be able to have that distributed security policy and enforcement going on, all the way down to those, all the way down to the, basically the containers, if you will, I think is a great idea.
Yeah, I'm really excited about what they're doing in HyperShield. I was talking with the folks at Worldwide Technology, and Chris Conrad there, who runs their security practice, was saying that he's always thought Cisco had good security products, but he never really thought they had much of a strategy. Now they have the strategy to go along with it. It's not just a random collection of stuff, right? And the hard part for Cisco before, I think, is that while you can have best of breed products, if you are selling them as best of breed products, you don't. It's a very difficult sales motion because I got to test my EDR versus yours and my, VPN versus yours, and so they weren't really leveraging the Cisco platform. But this is the best I've seen. And in fact, the other point that was made, which I thought G2 and John both explicitly said, was that they have a networking cloud, an observability cloud, and a security cloud that are coupled together. And last year, I didn't think that really came through. It just seemed like, hey, you're building 3 different platforms, right? And so you're creating 3 different silos of data. But now they actually went the level deeper to explain it. So
Yeah, and G2 even explained that what I thought was important was the unified AI assistant as well.
Yeah,
So, right, instead of having an individual AI assistant for every one of those domains, they're gonna, and it sounds like because G2's in charge of it, they're gonna, so more work for him, but basing
yeah,
it off the one that he's created for the security and drive that to the observability, drive that to the networking, right? Have those plugins for each of the domains to be able to leverage that same AI assistant, which for me, I like, I've always been a big fan of the principle of least astonishment. So if you're working in one, right, and as the teams start, converging and you open it up, you're able to be instantly productive.
yeah. Oh, and I'd be remiss in not mentioning the fact that Microsoft security stood on stage with Cisco, the
Right.
mortal enemy, Microsoft of Cisco. They're partnering now in the cloud space, or they partnered in cloud, and they're now partnering in security. And I think this is a big kind of seminal moment in Cisco's history for a company that has gone toe to toe with everybody else. For them to be collaborative in security, I think, is an indicator that they are indeed listening to customers who want help bringing these things together. And getting a piece of a big pie is better than getting none of a pie. And and so I do think we're seeing a different type of Cisco. I actually think G2 kind of called out the industry a little bit and said, we're going to work on creating more interoperability with other vendors, and we're inviting anybody to do that. So,
Yeah.
your thoughts on that? That was good to see, though.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's funny because for a lot of the show season, there's been a lot of talk about ecosystems and that it takes an ecosystem to build out a comprehensive solution in today's environments. And so while Cisco's not fond of the word ecosystem, they did highlight their partnerships, right? I think that's their vernacular that they would use in place of ecosystem. But yeah, I thought that was great to see the Microsoft one. Obviously, they were highlighting things with NVIDIA, vast data. I think they signed an agreement with Lenovo. So we're definitely seeing them opening up a little bit more and working with their partners more effectively. So I think that's going to be encouraging as well.
All right, so good for G2. He's keeping the innovation engine going there. So let's pivot now to networking. And so networking was interesting. There was no real big bang like there was in a hypershield, right? Although you did, when we're prepping for this, you did mention that they did introduce the concept of a global area network, which is the coming together of all our sub networks, WAN, internet, things like that. What do you think of are people going to buy into the concept of the global area network?
Yeah, I mean, the funny part is, well, obviously it's going to depend on the size of the company as well, right? So SMBs may not have a global area network. I mean, you could potentially consider that though if they're leveraging SaaS and where that SaaS is connecting to.
Yeah.
But certainly the larger enterprises, I think this is an evolution from the internet is the network. It's now you have to consider the global area network. And so not only your on-premises infrastructure, but and I think Cisco's term was for your owned and your unowned networking environment,
Right.
and how do you take stock of that. And I think overall as a term, I'm not against it by any means. Whether it'll take off and other organizations will do, I guess we'll see if some of the other larger analyst firms embrace it and create a magic quadrant around a global area network.
Who may
But
you be
for
referring
now, what's that? Maybe
to? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think all of that is like I said, I think that was important. I thought their Thousand Eyes, the digital experience assurance solution was a nice evolutionary piece for organizations leveraging that tool. I know a lot of customers really like Thousand Eyes, and so they're encouraged when there's more functionality there. And then I think also the big networking piece that was tied to AI was the hyperfabric, right?
Yeah.
And right, and so that's when we started talking about that, right? That's the infrastructure for AI. So for those enterprises who are trying to build out that back end GPU environment to do the training and modeling and so forth, right? They've come up with here's our comprehensive solution with the NVIDIA GPUs, the Cisco Ethernet, ultra high performance non-blocking, et cetera, back-end network environment, but also, again, part of the ecosystem conversation, vast data as well. So partnering with someone who's been really at the forefront of enabling a lot of those back-end environments from a data perspective.
Yeah. And so maybe I'll take back my statement. There wasn't a big bang. I guess hyper fabric would be. There's a lot of hyper going on, hyper shield, hyper fabric.
Correct.
I actually like the focus on Thousand Eyes. 18 months ago, I was talking to Joe Berger from Worldwide Tech, who does a lot of work with Cisco, and I said, "What would you like to see at a Cisco?" And he said, "More Thousand Eyes." He goes, "Customers love Thousand Eyes. We love Thousand Eyes. It lets us monitor things that historically been unmonitorable. We
Yep.
want more Thousand Eyes." And ever since then, um, they've delivered more Thousand Eyes. I mean, it's embedded on
Correct.
their video endpoints. They've got Thousand Eyes agents and everything today, and I think it's an asset that's. I thought Cisco really underutilized the first few years it owned it, but now it seems like it's exploded. And then the
Yeah.
rest of the security announcements were all kind of incremental things about what they're doing with,
Yep.
um, uh, some of the management tools and things like that. And so I still do
Yep.
think that the Meraki Catalyst integration could be a lot better.
Yeah.
Understanding I mean, you're talking two massive platforms you're trying to bring together, but they've
Correct.
consolidated management on the Wi-Fi side. I'd like them to see them do it on the switching side, because you
Yep.
and I have talked about this before, but I do think that Catalyst and Meraki can be a little confusing sometimes. So,
Yeah.
a little bit more work there. So,
Yeah, no, and we saw them integrate. I mean, the nice thing was that they made that big announcement that they're going to drive this integration through the networking cloud, and you saw they added SD-WAN at the show.
yeah.
So it's good to see the incremental, I guess, improvements and the continued down that path. And I think that will only get stronger as they continue to build that out.
Yeah, even the way they're thinking now about management, right, and monitoring. Um, who was I talking to? Somebody from Thousand Eyes. We were discussing I was sort of joking that you don't win awards for having more single panes of glass, right? But you also can't have one pane of glass. Um,
Yeah.
and so the idea, though, is with the Thousand Eyes integration, you can actually create Thousand Eyes visibility in like Meraki dashboard. And then if you want to drill deep on it, then you click on it and you flip over to Thousand Eyes, right?
Yeah.
So you give that sort of one view to rule them all at a high level, but then you have your separate panes of glass to go deep. And I thought that's really a good way for them to approach it. And I think it's something that frankly can give them a lot of differentiation in this world where there's so many visibility tools right now. So
Yeah. No, it's funny. I just smile when you said all that because it reminded me of maybe something called a mom. The
yeah, the
manager
old
of
model,
managers
manager of managers, yeah.
contextually launched down, drill down, right? So we're continuing. The problem is the technology keeps evolving. It gets so much more complex, and we need to keep evolving the tools to keep up with it. But like you said, with Thousand Eyes, they've done a really nice job of being able to bridge that gap between the on-premises and what always those other areas that have historically been a blind spot for organizations, and especially now that the environments are so much more distributed, that's such a key role for organizations to be able to have visibility there.
Yeah. All right, Bob. That was, I think, the highlights of most of the news. Anything else catch your eye?
I think, other than that, there was, I think some of the, they're talking about WebEx AI assistants and so
Yeah.
forth. And, I thought Liz's comments around their AI approach and trying to be that responsible, trying to be the adult in the room. I think, like I
Yeah.
said, those really resonated with me of what they're trying to take that thoughtful approach. They also recognize they need to go a lot faster, which I think we're starting to see. Talking to some of the engineering team, they're basically doubling their output year over year. So it's great to see them, finding ways to become more productive, to be able to innovate faster, to keep pace with what's going on in the market. And then I think, lastly for me, it was the slogan "Go Beyond." When I first saw it, I was like, okay, that's great. And as all the announcements came out, what I was thinking is this is really applicable to Cisco. They've gone beyond their individual BUs and they're now extending their value by integrating them across, tightly integrating all of the business units together to provide better solutions for their customers. So I applaud them
Yeah.
for that.
Historically, though, that BU structures really slowed Cisco down. And so if you're right and that go beyond is about that, then kudos to them. We should, and if they're going to move faster, they're going to have to do that. And it's interesting that Splunk may be the catalyst, pardon the pun, that actually caused them to maybe look at having to move faster, because you can almost look at Splunk as an overlay to all of
Yeah.
Cisco, right? Just but a data overlay, which they didn't really have before. The one thing I would have liked to have seen is either through Fran or Mary B. Wysocki, I'd like to see sustainability get some day one time on stage there. I
Yeah.
think Cisco's got. I was talking to Denise Lee there, who their head of sustainability engineering. Cisco's got so much data that around sustainability, and most customers you talk to have sustainability initiatives. They just really can't measure, how they get there.
Yeah.
And I think Cisco could play a great role there in helping their customers do it between the data they have and the CX organization, which is their fancy way of saying services. But I would Cisco does a lot of interesting things globally between Global Citizen and
Yeah.
their the CDA program, which helps digitize the world. I've heard actually Huawei's gotten booted out of some countries for some practices that were, let's say, not really on the up and up.
Okay.
Like when you see country leaders leave the country with a bag of cash, and Huawei is the infrastructure vendor, right? And I think they could give a little more airtime to that part of Cisco's business, because I think a lot of what they do, Bob, goes under the radar. And I
Yeah.
suppose Cisco's doing it not for the reasons of getting marketing out of it, but just by making the world a better place. But it certainly is
Yep.
something that I think the audience would be interested in.
No, I completely agree. I think that the hard part today is what I'm concerned about is that all the sustainability efforts that have been made to date are all going to be completely negated by all the AI environments that are deployed. And that
Yeah,
the sustainability piece is going to be about how do I save power from my general compute environment so I can apply it to my Gen AI environment? Because as we all know, those systems just suck up a ton of power. And I think they were talking about, it was like, I forget the number it was used, but the exponential amount more data it takes to do a prompt on Gen than it does a search, right?
yeah,
Through just doing a normal, right? So those types of things, I think what we need to think about from a sustainability perspective, and I think we saw some of this at Cisco, especially with their immersion cooling and liquid cooling and things that are going on. And we heard from Equinix how they're leveraging the heat to heat, the Olympic pools in Paris, which is all great. And I thought really innovative ways to leverage that sustainability. But I think the Gen AI component in the infrastructure is really going to stress organizations' sustainability programs. And it's also, so it's going to make it really important that they're everywhere they can save power because of what's needed, because it could actually even strain the power supply as well as this rolls out into the enterprise.
You bring up an interesting point. And Denise Lee and I were talking about this, and she said something interesting that we haven't really taught people how to use AI effectively. And your point on search uses less power than Gen AI. Like if you're going for your house in Westford to Boston, you could book a private plane, right, and take a flight, but you're not going to, because it's more efficient to drive, right? But that's kind of what we're doing today. We're using Gen AI for everything. And so what we haven't really learned yet is how to use it effectively, and when we should use it, when we shouldn't use it. And even within data center design, I think a lot of the new equipment, Bob, is a lot more power efficient, but I'm not sure
Yep.
people understand how to tweak and tune it. I almost think that we need AI to deploy AI, if that makes any sense, which creates
Yeah,
this
no,
chicken egg thing.
yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great point. And be able to drive, to optimize and make everything more efficient, and to be able to do that when you're thinking about all the requests that are being made, et cetera, right? To be able to have some intelligence that helps organizations make the right choice, so it's a sustainable one.
Yeah. All right, Bob. Well, that was a long one today, but there was a lot to unpack from that event. So, any other closing thoughts on it?
Other than, like I said, it was great to see all the innovation. It was great to see all the announcements. The reality is now the hard work begins. And what
Yeah.
we'll be looking for is seeing them executing against those announcements going forward over this next year.
Yeah, well, if Chuck keeps his word, they're going to continue to move faster. I suppose that over the next year or so, we'll continue to see this pace of innovation. There's the old expression that people consume innovation that fast, but you know what? People can. Companies have always been proved. We innovate so much faster than we did today back in the PC era, and 10 years from now we'll innovate even faster than we are today. So to me, that's not really a concern. We'll figure that out. So.
Absolutely.
So, all right, Bob. Well, I'm glad you're back. I guess I'll see you back on the road next week or the week after. So,
Sounds good. Looking forward to seeing you, Zia.
all right. So, on behalf of Bob Laliberte from theCUBE Research, I'm Zia Scaravallo from ZK Research, saying thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next time in another episode of ZKast.